Well, we're delighted to have all of you joining us today on this podcast. And I am particularly delighted to have our guest with us today. Katy Gallegos is joining us. You've heard about her a little bit there and in the intro. And so we're going to jump right in. And Katy, welcome to our podcast today.
Thank you so much. I'm honored that I was asked to speak today.
Well, we're delighted. So today we're going to talk really addressing quite a growing phenomena in education today, and that is the whole element of homeschooling. More and more families are looking at homeschooling. That's the fastest growing element in as far as growth and change in what's going on in education is the homeschool space. That's where you are, and we're also going to talk a little bit about some particular curriculum. But let's just jump in. Tell us a little bit more about your background, about you personally, so that our audience knows who's talking to them.
Great. So I grew up in Fairbanks, Alaska, or actually technically North Pole, Alaska, which is a little town outside of Fairbanks, Alaska. And I loved public school. I was an only child, or I still am an only child. I lived kind of far out in the woods, and public school to me was my only social interaction besides church time, really, that I would get. And I had pretty good teachers. I had a good experience in school. And so I had no reason to have anything negative to think about public school. I did, however, have some negative experiences with homeschoolers up there. All the ones that I had encountered were super weird. And so, that was never on my radar that I would ever do anything like that. So fast forward, my family and I moved to Arkansas, and we had our first daughter. And a friend of mine who I really respected back in Alaska had pulled her kid out of like a Christian academy and began to homeschool her. And I was like, why would you do that? That's like the best case scenario. I was looking for what I was going to maybe do with my daughter once she became school age. And we didn't have very many options around here. And I just thought, why would you leave a Christian academy to bring her home? And she explained to me just the relationship with your children that you have with homeschooling, how sending them off to any school, public or private or whatever, just takes away that discipling that you get to do with your child in those formative years. And the number of hours that you're spending with them are not the prime hours of the kid's day, getting them shuffled up in the morning and out the door, and then home, dinner time, bath time, bedtime is not just the best hours of their day. Their best hours are in the middle of the day, and just you lose out on that. And having my toddler at that time, I just was like, oh, I don't want to lose out on the best hours of the day with her. That made so much sense to me. And the other things that she said as well really resonated with me. And so it kind of got my wheels turning, but I still thought, homeschooling, it's just not something I would ever want to do. And then God just kept putting different conversations and people and situations in my path where I could tell he was kind of leaning me in that direction. And I didn't like that still. And so I thought, I'll ask my husband because he will not be on board with this. And then it'll be his fault. So that's fine. And so I brought it up to my husband one day finally. And he was like, absolutely. That's what we definitely need to do with our children. And I was like, shoot. So I started looking into, sorry, there's a fly buzzing around me. I started looking into options for homeschooling in our area. And I knew that I would need help because it was so far off my radar that I would not be able to just jump in and feel successful. I didn't want to let my kid down or, be inadequate at this. And I found a classical conversations community in Harrison. And I had the lady there come and give like an informational meeting to a group of people in my little town. And several of them decided to join the program, but my kid was still too young to actually join. And so several of my friends joined Classical Conversations and really loved it. And they brought that program to our area. And then we joined once my daughter was old enough. So that's how we got involved with that.
That's very interesting. So before we jump deeper into that, you've raised several things that I've heard before. Homeschool families are, weird. I've heard that, and some people maybe see that because they tend to be very tight families, very connected. Some maybe haven't developed great social skills, but that was more probably in the earlier years of homeschooling because there are so many more options available today than what used to be. So we may want to jump into that a little bit, but more importantly, you made a statement about the parent giving up the very best time of the child's life and the child's day to be engaged with them. I think you used the word disciple, which is a religious term, typically thought of as a religious term, and certainly every parent communicates their values, should be communicating their values to their child, but it goes really down to the whole discipleship, really on a deeper level, is about raising up adults. It's about pouring into someone else what you know and have experienced, and you are just investing your life into them. And what more important thing could a parent do with their child than to do that? So let's talk a little bit more about that. Because I think most parents listening here probably have, especially if they're not already in this space, maybe they're thinking about it, maybe they're concerned about what's going on in their community, in their school, and they want the best for their child, but they're not sure what that is. Maybe it's homeschooling, maybe it's not, but every parent should be exploring that. But the whole idea of pouring your abilities, your knowledge, your love, your parenting into that child. Talk a little more about that and how important is that?
Absolutely. I think that's the utmost importance. And I think that friend that was in Alaska who told me that she was pulling her child out of a Christian academy to homeschool her, she said something too that I thought was really important, is that at 4 or 5 years old, your kids are not ready to go out into the world and handle value-based decisions at those ages. And I had never thought of that before. And she said, how are they supposed to be equipped for that? And, I was a good kid through public school, but I didn't have the foundation that I could have had. And I wasn't prepared for a lot of the conversations and things that I was exposed to, but also the conversations and experiences I was exposed to are pretty different, 25 years ago than they are now. So I think even more so, kids now need to be really shored up before they're sent out to be lights or to be decision makers or to know how to have conversations with others. And so we don't shield our children from the world. And in fact, we've been to almost all 50 states. We've taken them with us to all kinds of places. And they're all teaching moments. And we have lots of those. I believe that's what we're supposed to be, a part of the world. But with the right training and, like I said, discipling, to be able to not be conformed by the world or not be affected by the things that I don't want them to grow up to have a lot of the struggles that people are having nowadays. It's not fair to those kids. And I don't think that needs to be my kids' story.
So I think what I'm hearing you say is you want to make sure your child has a solid foundation and has a strong support structure, knows that they have a strong support structure first and foremost in you, and has an understanding of who they are, and perhaps that spiritual foundation as well, before they launch out into a world that is full and increasingly full of very confusing ideas that the child is going to have to grapple with. They're going to be challenged in unfathomable ways, and they need to have some kind of foundation before they're just plunged into that. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Definitely. And I've noticed that even more with my now teenage daughter is some of the big conversations and the big worldview issues. You've got to, in like the name Classical Conversations, which is the curriculum that we chose to use. I thought, what a strange name. But as she gets older, I realized that it is all about conversations and wrestling with the ideas that are out there. And whether you homeschool or public school or whatever you choose to do, your kids are getting a message and a certain direction that they're being taught. And I think it should be what the parents want their kids to learn. And so it needs to come from those conversations with their parents, regardless of where they are educated. And I love that she can come to me with the hard questions and I get to give her my opinion first. So the first thing that she hears is mom and dad's thoughts on these topics. And we're very open to hard conversations. We have 4 older adopted kids who, we had to have some really hard conversations with because they were already in a different place in life. So that's just been the culture of our family for many years. But it's really great to know that they have a safe place to come and get that first opinion from, and then whatever they hear later on, they can kind of base off of that first conversation that they had about it. And it's okay for them to grapple and wrestle with ideas and to debate me and my husband too. And I think that that's even better. They learn how to debate in a respectful and intellectual manner and not just in an emotional way, which we see all around us in this world. And that is just priceless. It's very useful and it's real life, and it can be life-changing for them.
You're making some really significant statements here for parents. The importance of just having conversations with your children. It's amazing how many families never had that. And I think a lot of times it's because parents are doing the best they have, but maybe didn't have the best modeling of parenting themselves. And so, they never had deep, meaningful conversations with their parents. And they just kind of grew up and, without those real significant conversations. And as a result, they picked up information from wherever. And so they've not learned how to even have those conversations many times. But it's so important. I know my wife and I, we always tried to have good conversations with our children. My wife far better than I was at that. But the important thing was always that those conversations were always a safe place where you could talk about anything and it was okay. And, it wasn't a matter of accusation. It wasn't a matter of, oh, how can you go there? No, it's okay. Let's talk about that. And then really, just having deep, meaningful, thoughtful conversations that really help give a child perspective, give a child a sense of confidence, that they can think through these issues. They can talk through these issues with people they know, love them, and care about them. And so I think that's so significant, what you've just said there. Let's go a little deeper into the classical conversation. So you kind of alluded to that as, it's an educational system, but explain more about some of the foundational concepts there for those who may not know.
Okay. One thing I wanted to go backwards in just for a second is
Sure.
In reference to those conversations with our kids, I just want to encourage parents that it doesn't have to always sound good. You don't have to know what to say. You don't have to have the answers. It's okay if maybe even better when you don't sometimes, and you tell your kids, I don't know, let's wrestle through that together. Let's see if we can find truth here and get to the bottom of what would be the truth in the situation. And let's figure this out together. And sometimes, especially with our older kids, there were some awkward conversations I wasn't ready for, but you're here for it anyways. And you just say, whew, okay, let's do this. Let's buckle up and have this conversation. And I think being awkward and uncomfortable is okay. And just feel through it. And it's awkward for them too, probably. So it's better for them to have that with you than with a kid on the school bus or anywhere else. So that's when just had that encouragement out there. But as far as classical conversations goes, it's the model is classical, Christian, and community. So the classical aspect is that they use the classical method of education. It works best with the children's natural learning abilities. So the younger kids do, it's called the grammar of learning. So they learn lots of memory work. Kids their minds are just sponges, and they're just so ready to absorb anything and everything. And they don't always know how to put that into practice or how to grapple with the bigger ideas of it, but they can memorize terms and words and facts and things like that, like at no other period in their life. The second phase of learning is called the dialectic phase, which we all know is that like middle school argumentative. They call it the dialectic phase, where they're just wanting to grapple with things and wrestle with them and kind of figure out what they believe and what they know and don't know. And so in a classical model, you work with that behavior of that age group instead of saying, well, just take my word for it. Here's what I'm teaching you. Just learn it, darn it. It's like, no, let's wrestle with it. Let's figure out why. Let's let you ask questions. And sometimes that's a little bit irritating as a parent, because you do just want to say, like, let's just get through it. But no, that's the whole point in this dialectic stage, is to wrestle through it and let the education be their own. And then that final stage is called the rhetorical phase, where once they have the facts, they've wrestled with them, then they can kind of become experts on them. And, the older kids, they love to sound intellectual and smart, and they like to talk about their ideas, and they have all these big ideas, so they can really put it into practice and speak to what they've learned. So that's the classical model, kind of in a nutshell, maybe oversimplified, but it's just a beautiful method of educating that worked for a very long time for some of the best thinkers in history. And it works well today as well.
No, I was going to say, I think you summed that up very well, really tying it around the different phases, natural phases of learning for a child, and really letting that process happen naturally within the phase of their natural intellectual and physical development.
Yeah, the next aspect of classical conversations is that it's Christian. So it's going with a biblical worldview, and in every educational system has a worldview, and we choose the biblical one. Also, so much of our history is based on religion, and a lot of that's really left out in a more traditional educational model. And so there's just gaps in why things happened, or the motives behind different things. And when you use a Christian worldview, those gaps are filled in because it's not left out. So that's kind of the second part of CC. And then the third part is community. And to me, that is absolutely priceless, because especially for somebody who never anticipated homeschooling, I always say lunchtime is my favorite, because when we meet together weekly, and the kids preview the next week's work, they review the last several weeks' work, they do a science and an art project together, and they also do a public speaking thing of some sort. So for little kids, it might be like, this is my dolly and my grandma gave her to me and I love her. Thank you for listening. Something very simple. And as the kids get older, they have more meat on their presentations. But the beauty in that is that our kids are being taught to speak in front of their peers and in front of others from 4 years old and on up, instead of, like, for me, I was taught to do public speaking in speech class in high school when I had zits all over my face and I was an awkward teenager and it just mortified to be in front of people. But our kids are taught since they're very little, so it becomes natural to them, in a much easier way than it was for me. But with community, they get the kids get that aspect. They get to have friendships. They get to have a lot of memories together and do a lot of fun things together in our community days. But then, like I was saying, for lunchtime, all of us moms pick each other's brain. What's working for you in math class? What's working for you at home for your read alouds? Like, what are you reading that's tying into our history stuff with classical conversations? My kid's a terrible speller. How can I improve their spelling or whatever? We just all bump ideas off of one another and what works for some kids. Or we have a lot of dyslexic kids on our campus. And so what are you using for that and things of that nature? Just together, we're so much better than all being individual in our own homes, isolated and not having that community support. There's also some accountability from week to week that we are working on the things that we're doing with our curriculum. But the community aspect is probably my favorite because it has made me feel so supported, and it has enabled me to, I feel like, really thrive in this journey.
So, Katy, I think what you have just expressed to us is really kind of sums up some of the progression, some of the adaptation that's happened over the years in much of homeschooling. In the early years, it was just, okay, we're going to keep our kids at home. We're going to teach them ourselves. And basically, we pour into them everything that we think is important, we think is going to help them, or we just want to keep them isolated from bad influences outside of our home. That was what seemed to drive a lot of the conversation, a lot of the decision making, where today, and as you express, there is that home involvement, there's that parental involvement, there's what happens with the child and the parent at home, and then there is that community. So it's kind of like once a week you get together in a kind of a co-op group learning, and you have both, the small kids together and then the older kids, and many times, and it varies from place to place how they do this, but where, the small kids are grouped together and they engage in experience with each other. But then sometimes where the small kids observe the larger kids and the older kids, and the older kids, observe and sense help mentor along the younger kids. And so it's this kind of almost one room schoolhouse approach that we had in our early educational history. And so we're seeing, that kind of thing that helps to build community, as you use that expression. I think that's a very important element. But let me go back just a little bit into that second C, and that the C there is Christian. I think a lot of parents don't realize, we kind of, in the public space, what's been told is, it's a separation of the state and religion. And there are elements of our society that have really hammered that point home for their own purposes. But in reality, that was never the intent of our forefathers or the founding of the nation. It was that the state could not control and use religion as a tool or a weapon to control, to manage, to regulate, or whatever individuals. That the state could not do that. But nowhere in our early history do we actually see documentation where religion or faith or Christianity was strongly discouraged. It was an encouragement that people explore truth, try to discover truth, to learn, to grow. And many times the religious element had to do with not only purpose and meaning, but also had very much to do, and this is true of all religions, but particularly so in the Christian religion, is around, how do we manage and regulate relationships? Because you can't have healthy society without some common values. And, all around us in our society, there are basic common values that are more or less taken for granted. Sometimes they are being challenged today, and it's okay for values to be challenged, but they need to be challenged, as you said, in a way that really digs down to what is true and what is best for individuals and for community. And so I think, having the values that faith, Christianity brings into the guidance and the understanding, the meaning of life, the why it answers so many why questions. Why is it wrong to take something from somebody else? Our law says you're not allowed to cheat or steal, whatever. Now some states are changing that. You can steal as long as it's not more than $2,000 or whatever. But those are breakdowns in our society. Those are not things that build up our society. And I think most parents value an understanding and a help to their children to understand why these things are so important and where they get their basis so that life makes sense. Would you like to speak more on that?
Yeah, I think that that's a huge pull. And I think we've seen more families joining our Classical Conversations community who maybe aren't practicing Christians or who wouldn't really maybe claim to be a Christian. They maybe believe in God, but they're maybe not sold out on like the organized religion aspect of it. But they want their kids to be in a place where values are in place and where they're not going to be bombarded with ideas that are just, pretty crazy. I think that more than ever, people are seeking truth, or there's that dichotomy where there's some who are not, but there are more now who are, that they're being kind of pushed into seeking truth more because they're realizing that, like you just said, the law of stealing less than $2,000 isn't stealing. That's just crazy. And that pushes people more towards this, like, let's find places where there's truth and where there's right and wrong and where we could be, have our kids in an environment where they're surrounded by people who also agree that there are rights and wrongs and truths to be found.
It's interesting because, pretty much all religious teachings have some of these common values, many commonalities in many of the world religions. And so I think parents from all kinds of backgrounds, they want their children to get this. Many parents don't want this to particularly be taught in their schools, but here's the advantage of when you're teaching at home, you get to oversee this and you have curriculum that helps you explore these things yourself as an adult and as a parent, and then help communicate those to your children in a meaningful and a natural way that is comprehensive but also comprehensible. And then as that gets lived out in community, all of a sudden, as we're raising our children, we are raising them in a world that begins to make sense to them and that gives them these foundations that they can build their life around rather than just chaos, which is what so much of our school system today is bringing to the children and frankly, bringing home and bringing into our community.
Absolutely. I think that the families, like I said, that have been kind of drawn to the homeschooling sector they're seeking that, and they're seeking just less chaos and less confusion and just a more simple kind of back to basics life. And something else that this year I've learned with my kids too is with homeschooling, I've always done this, but I didn't realize what a blessing it was until kind of recently. I saw some examples of not being able to do this with kids. And I thought, I'm so thankful I get to just take my kids along normal life with me too, like teaching them how to make appointments and like on the phone, or looking things up, or gardening and growing your own food and doing things like that might just seem, I don't know, disposable, or things that are not that important, but I think that they're incredibly important. And what better place to teach science and math and all kinds of things than in the garden in particular. We've been doing a lot of that this year, and I'm like, they get to see it really in practice and in life, and also taking them even just things like grocery shopping and how to meal plan and do the price per ounce and all those things like that. That's all very practical stuff that if I was torn in, if my day was so chopped up where I didn't get to have plenty of time with them to do those things, it would always be in a rush. And so I get to slow down a little bit and use these opportunities, these mundane things, as teaching opportunities, because that's what they are. They're, I'm not an unschooler where everything is just an experience. I think there's a group of people who do that, and I think that it can probably be done well, but maybe not by me. I don't have the brain for that, but we do our book work and our curriculum work, but then we also have a lot of real life experiences together as well. So I think that's a really big blessing.
Well, share maybe some resources. If parents or people want to learn more about classical conversations, particularly if they want to just get more information, how can they do that?
Yeah, Classical Conversations has a really great website, and they have, it's just classicalconversations.com. And they have some different videos on there that will help explain the different levels of the CC program, and kind of the why and the nuts and bolts. It's a worldwide program, so there's programs in all over lots of countries, but tons in the US. So chances are there's one close to you, and you can go visit for a day and kind of just get a feel for what it's like. It's hard to watch a video or hear someone speak about it and really understand what the classical model is. It's so much easier to just jump in and watch it happen in action. So I really suggest going and visiting a campus that's near you. Most of them are really open to having visitors, and your kids can just jump right into a class and experience it firsthand.
Now, my experience, just throwing in here too, is because knowledge is it's always around building blocks, right? So whenever you launch into a curriculum, particularly like classical conversations, that starts with a lot of early memorization and certain language acquisition, because that's the foundation for words, and then thoughts and ideas, and it's that building block structure. If a family, if they get involved when their children are younger, it's much easier, because then they're in that flow. It's maybe a little difficult to plug somebody in that's a sophomore in high school into that program, because if they don't have the foundations that come to that level, that can be a little bit difficult. Would you agree with that, or do you have a different opinion?
I would agree that it's easier if they start from little, and it's the program is used the way it was designed, from these younger ones, all the preparation work that gets them ready for those older classes and the older levels. But I have seen several kids come in at an older age and actually really thrive. A lot of them are really seeking education, and that sounds silly, but they're not seeking filling in the blanks or just rote memorization with no meaning to it. They're seeking putting all the pieces together and seeing how all the subjects are not these isolated little boxes of different subjects that are not related at all, that they really are just full circle, holistic subjects that they're all related. And so the kids who come in with those mindsets really, really thrive, because they're finally able to just kind of satisfy that hunger. this is why I learned stuff, you know? And so I think that those kids maybe even appreciate this homeschooling model and this curriculum more than the ones who've grown up in it, because the ones growing up in it take it for granted. This is what we've always done. You know, they don't realize how charmed their little lives are. But the ones who come into it seem to just be like, thank you. Like it's just refreshing to their little educational souls.
Well, Katy, this has been an interesting conversation. Thank you so much for sharing this time with us, and to all of you who've been listening in. Thank you for joining us. I hope that you picked up something that's useful to you. If you want to learn more about Classical Conversations, go to classicalconversations.com. As was suggested, you can always visit a local community that's involved with that and find out what works best for you and your child. And so thank you for being involved. Thank you for making a difference for our children and our country. And again, Katy, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you. And thank you for the work that you do for our educational system, and for inviting people like me from just different systems to join your show. I really appreciate that.
You're most welcome.